Oh hey, it's Wes, and today I want to talk to you about the Sony ZV-E10. Their, I was going to say flagship, but right now it's really their only APS-C camera, as everything else has been discontinued due to the chip shortage. And honestly, I don't think they're going to bring back the other ones. So let's talk about that. Number one, ZV-E10, it's got a terrible name. Number two, I used an A6000 for years, and I currently use an A6100 a lot for video work, mostly for live streaming stuff. So how does the ZV-E10 compare? What is it even for? Let's find out. We'll start with the categories, as always, the build quality. So this is a very small and light camera. It is very plasticky. I mean, they did want it to be as light as possible. We have not a whole lot of weather sealing going on here. It's supposed to be somewhat hardened against the elements, but I mean, you've got big holes up here for the directional microphones. You've got the Sony hot shoe. I don't see any like O-rings or anything going on around here. It doesn't really, the doors don't even really come around the ports, so not well weather sealed. Overall, this is kind of a lower end camera when it comes to build, so that's not surprising that this isn't a fantastically rugged camera. I'm gonna give this a 5.5 out of 10. Now, I'm not just comparing this to other APS-C cameras, I'm comparing this to the whole Sony lineup and cameras in general. Next up is the feature set, and this is a slightly confusing one. I feel like this camera, even when it came out, was getting a bit long in the tooth, because this is their current APS-C body. There has to be another one coming along, because here we have just a single UHS 1 card slot, the old style battery, we have a 24 megapixel sensor, which is very similar to the one that's been used ever since the A6000. Now, the imaging pipeline appears to be revamped. We are getting better quality out of it, but it's a bit of a tired sensor. We need something that's backside illuminated, maybe even stacked. That would be more for an APS-C flagship though. This does 4K 30 recording with Slog 3, so that's fantastic, but that can get a little bit noisy because we have a limited dynamic range with the sensor. We have a lower res screen on the back here. Again, not surprising. It's not like this is the A1 with a disappointing screen. This is a lower end camera with a disappointing screen. And we have no viewfinder, you might notice. Honestly, not a big loss because this is largely focused toward video users. And you'd be losing out on the compact size if you added an EVF. Personally, yes, I did miss it, but for the target market, not that useful. You have a red focus box, that's something the A7 III can't do. USB-C charging, not high speed or power delivery charging. So when the camera's turned off, it'll draw about 7 watts of charging, but when it's on, it won't really go any higher than like 3, maybe 4 watts, depending on how much power it's drawing. So it dials it down to not be handling too much power. I assume that this is an overheating or battery limitation, thermal limitation. The color science is nicer than on the A6000 and the A61 6400 series. We have a micro HDMI port and a microphone port. There is a headphone jack down at the bottom here. Honestly, they squeeze a surprising amount of stuff in this tiny little body. But when we plug in the USB-C to the camera, we can use it as a webcam, but only at 720p. So far, the A7 IV is still the winner for this because it'll do full 1080p in fantastic quality because it has a higher level of USB-C port. This one has a limited throughput. We're missing stabilization. We can use what's called active stabilization, which just shifts pixels around, it crops in a little bit. It gets a little bit gooey when things are moving around a lot. And I assume that there should be another camera above this in the lineup that has actual sensor shift stabilization. That would be great to have, especially for something that's targeted so much at vlogging. But at this price point, it's kind of reasonable to expect this level of features. So I gotta give this a 7.5 out of 10 for features. It does have a lot of stuff crammed into this tiny little body. Handling and usability, this is where I have some issues. Oh, the issues I have. I am used to using full frame Sony cameras where I have more dials and more grip and more battery life. This was a pain in the butt to use. This is supposed to be an entry-level camera for people who aren't necessarily super serious photographers and videographers. But we still have the same menu system from all the other Sony cameras. It's the slightly updated one, that's nice. But there is a steep learning curve. A lot of stuff has been shaved off of here. We don't have a lot of buttons and dials and custom buttons going on. And again, that was frustrating to me because it took me longer to get the job done and to switch between things. We don't have an HEVC codec, which would be fantastic for this camera. And I find the mode switch is kind of annoying. It's kind of slow to switch between modes. There's a lot of lag. And especially for a hybrid camera like this, it would be nice to be able to switch faster. In version 1 of the firmware, it was a lot slower. Now with version 2, it's quite a bit snappier, thankfully, because it was really getting on my nerves. We have a laterally polarized screen, which is a bit problematic because if you're outside and you have polarized sunglasses on, depending on which way you are holding the camera, you might see nothing at all, and you don't have a viewfinder to look through. So bright day, sunglasses, you gotta take them off if they're nice sunglasses like these. A more expensive camera will have a circular polarized screen that is immune to that. Now, if you put a glass screen protector on this, that will scatter the polarization back again. I am unsure as to whether or not there's room for a glass screen protector under the screen, so I'm not sure that I can 100% recommend that. What are we missing? Well, a more intuitive touch-based interface. I feel like people want to use this touchscreen, especially the entry-level people who are likely coming from a smartphone. And the touch-based thing going on here is very limited. We don't have 4K 60, we don't have 4K 120. Not that we would expect that at this price point. Battery life is kind of middling. I really wish that they would just make this grip a tiny bit bigger on every Sony camera and just put the FZ100 battery in there. Stop using these MP50 batteries. It's just absurd. Rolling shutter honestly was the only thing that surprised me about the performance and the features of this camera. I thought that it would be better than in the A7 III because we have a smaller sensor, but it's the same number of pixels. So the sensor scan speed is about the same, so silent shutter and rolling shutter is fairly similar. It's not better than in the A7 III, but it's not as bad as in the A7 IV, thankfully. But honestly, this camera was not made for me, so I'm gonna quit my whining, and I'm gonna talk to someone it was actually made for. My friend Katie. Let's go. This is Katie, an actual owner of one of these cameras, ZV-E10. I always forget what it's called.
That's what it is. I say Z, even though I'm Canadian. I don't know why I do that. ZV-E10, but it flows better.
ZV-E10, ZV-E10. Yeah, I think it's designed to be said that way.
Yeah.
She is a beginner photographer, but a streamer on Twitch, Link. And so she is more the target audience for this camera. That guy with the trailer driving by is not the target audience for this camera.
Or he would have known.
He would have.
Do that.
So what are your thoughts?
As a beginner, I am still learning a lot about how to use this for photography. I primarily use it for food photography and nature photos as well, usually plants and trees and flowers, things like that, but also for food that I've made, for staging the food and things like that. And its primary function though is as a streaming camera. I have it set up in my kitchen. It catches me face on, and the autofocus helps me to go from, back in the kitchen and close up. So
it was basically going from a webcam up to this, which made a bit of a difference for you probably.
It made a huge difference. The feedback has been staggering. Like I started off with a face cam because it was what I could afford at the time, and I've been saving up for a nicer camera for quite some time. And so this one's been perfect because it's got the quality I'm looking for in streaming, especially. Like I said, I get a lot of feedback from viewers, especially ones who've been there before and are coming back after a little bit of time saying, "Whoa, you got an upgrade, didn't you?" Like it's not something I have to tell anybody. It's very, very obvious. This has definitely been a learning curve for me, and I've been working on it, and thanks to your help and advice, I've been learning a lot about it as well. But yeah, it's been a learning curve, but I don't know if that's more to do with me and my just general lack of knowledge to begin with, or
it's a bit of a deep end getting into real photography.
It is, yeah.
You're still shooting in JPEG, I assume, at this point?
I think so.
Okay.
Probably.
And you just transfer it to your phone, or how do you get the pictures
Yeah, I usually just transfer it to my phone.
Is that like the Wi-Fi thing?
Yeah, so there's
Okay.
a Wi-Fi function that's quite handy, and you can transfer the photos directly to your phone.
And you're using the Viltrox 23 1.4.
Lenses are obviously also very, very new to me,
Yeah.
so it's that's been another
But
thing.
Sony has some new wide-angle lenses for APS-C specifically. They're only like $1,500.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
nice
you know.
low-cost lenses from Sony's perspective, so yeah, we're filming on a Viltrox 13 1.4, and this is the 23 1.4, and they're much more affordable than Sony's lenses. I mean, it's great that Sony came out with these new lenses, but I feel like they're still a little on the expensive side when we're tailoring toward just entry-level people for the most part.
It took me a minute to be able to even save up for the camera body itself, and I received a grant through 1000 Dreams Fund for an equipment upgrade, so that helped me get everything else. I had the money for the camera body, but I didn't have like the lens and the tripod, and I've really enjoyed getting to know this camera. I'm still, learning more every day. Every time I take it out and start messing around with it and taking photos,
Yeah.
I'm learning more about how to use it. For a beginner, it is great. I think. I don't have the experience of knowing what any advanced, use would look like, but I found it pretty easy to be able to take at least decent quality photos without too much extra effort on my part. So.
I will say one thing that I feel like all the camera manufacturers are kind of missing the boat on this, in that, like, for you to start using this camera, it's almost like this monumental task to get used to all this extra stuff going on. It's got a touch screen. You can sort of touch some stuff on it, but not everything.
Yeah,
and the menu's kind of gigantic and slow, and
I do find the menu a little daunting. When I open it up, I'm like, okay. How do I make it do the thing I want it to do?
So I just feel like especially this camera should be so much more user-friendly, because it is specifically designed for people like you, not me. And yeah, I want it to do more complicated things more easily, but even then, I'm kind of annoyed at how slow the menu is and how expansive all the options are, and that the touchscreen doesn't really do all that much for me. And I feel like this particular camera, it should specifically be attempting to bridge between your iPhone and everything else. And I mean, I complain about camera menu systems all the time, so that's... I think that the expensive camera should have a better menu system too, so it's...
Yeah. No, that's fair though. That's fair.
All right, we're gonna go take some photos.
All right.
Wide as I can get on this Viltrox lens. But the background is nice and creamy. Is it gonna focus? There it is. 10 millimeters gives me an equivalent of 15, which crops in with active stabilization to this distance, which is still pretty wide. Then with the remote handle, I can zoom in on myself to 20. It's a bit close. And then I can do a push-pull. Oh no. And then back out again. But it would be nice to have a camera with in-body image stabilization and not just active stabilization, which is pixel shifting. But we do get great image quality with Slog 3, even though our dynamic range is a little limited compared to the full-frame options. Alright, so Katie is still learning the camera, again because, as I said, this is not the most intuitive design. It really needs to bridge the gap between a smartphone and a professional camera, and it does not do that. Handling and usability, I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. You can absolutely get the job done once you learn the ropes and get it all set up. Image and video quality. I was actually moderately surprised at this because I'm so used to the A6000 and A6100 that it is improved. Slog 3 can be great, but it can get grainy pretty quickly. But photos, dynamic range, color, and rendition and all that, it is better. I quite liked it. You can check out the image samples down below. If you want to pick up one of these cameras, again, I have links down in the description below to help support this channel and to feed my fat cats. So overall, the image quality, gonna give that a 7 out of 10. Pleasantly surprised. Autofocus. This has Sony's latest real-time autofocus, firmware version 2.0, introduced animal autofocus. It works quite well. Although we have the most advanced algorithms for the most part, it is obvious that this has a slower processor in it than any of the other current Sony cameras. Everything from navigating the menu to actually using the autofocus system is just a little bit slower. So it is quick and reliable, but it's not, up at the top with the other latest Sony cameras. I'm gonna give that an 8 out of 10. Value. A lot of people jumping into this camera for the first time will think that this camera at $700 is a bit rich. That's with no lens. But when we look at how this compares, the A6100, which arguably has less features than this, is $750, largely discontinued. A6400, which has close to feature parity with this, is $900. Arguably discontinued. The A6600, which includes actual sensor stabilization, is $1,400. That sounds like a bargain now. Let's see how it compares to everything else. We have the low-end Canon APS-C camera, the R10, for $980. Still significantly more, but Canon has a bunch of APS-C cameras. It's kind of wacky. They've got the M200 for $550, the M50 Mark II for $700, the SL3 for $650, and they all get very similar things done. None of them are that far from this price point when you count all of the features and so forth. And Nikon has the Z50, which is arguably a much more professional version of an APS-C camera for $850. And Fuji has the X-T30 Mark II for $900, which is a pretty slick camera on its own. I fully expect a higher end version of this soon. I expect that it would have been out already by now if it weren't for the chip shortage, and Sony wants to put their wood behind the arrows of their most expensive cameras. So if you want to get an A1 right now, you can get that, because that is where they're going to put all their money and all their assembly line capacity for chips into that camera, because that's where their largest profit margin is by far. They make a ton of money on the A1 when they sell one. This one, much narrower profit margin. Sometimes even today these are harder to find. So I don't know when the higher end APS-C camera is going to come along. So overall, with the whole field of APS-C and vlogging cameras, I'm gonna give this an 8.5 out of 10 for value. So overall, that gives us a 42 out of 60 or a 70%. Personally, this is not the camera for me. Let me know what you think about the ZV-E10 down in the comments below. If you have any questions about it, let me know. I'll get back to you in a jiffy. Again, if you want to pick up one of these or you want to see more image samples, there are links down in the description. But until next time, let's go take some photos.